Hello writers, come write with me. My name is Mykela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Write with Mykela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Before we get into today's video, I want to remind you that NaNoWriMo is coming up. November is National Novel Writing Month. Go sign up for free and start writing a novel in November, starting November 1st. You are aiming for 1,667 words per day. It sounds like a lot, but I'm sure you will get close if you only spend an hour and a half per day writing your stories. Leave a comment below on if you sign up and if you're going to use one of our shared plots or something all your own. Now, today is Friday, which is story time, or the day of our chapter exchange. Your work will be extra videos, but everything else will be the same for my viewers. I will label chapters from Plot 1 as Season 1 and Plot 2 as Season 2, as I've said before. If you're writing with me and you wish to exchange chapters, then send your chapter with written permission to WritewithMykela@gmail.com. I will post the email address at the end of the video. I'm looking forward to reading your chapters, even if I can't read them all on the channel. All chapters read on Friday, whether they are mine or another writer's work, are copyright protected material, and no one may use any part in writing their own stories. This story is also PG-13, so if you're under 13 years of age, you need parental guidance. The story is in its rough draft stage, just as the last story we heard. The title of this story is Tajiia, and today we are reading chapter 11. If you would like to read along, then send to the email addresses stated above and request a PDF of the chapter. Make sure you are specific about either City of the Ancients or Tajiia and which chapter. Now, let's start. Tajiia, Chapter 11, Pursuit. In the pre-dawn, soldiers started gathering and leaving the villages. King Pommelstone's lead commander told them to get into formation on the main road. Even though they were marching north, the soldiers in the villages to the north of the road also came to line up and get in formation. For now, the lead commander left the huntsmen to maintain martial law, and he divided the handlers with their dogs into groups to stay in the villages with the huntsmen. The sun glinted off the soldiers' armor and off their weapons. The people in the villages peeked through their curtains as the soldiers left, and as they heard the dogs enter, which filled their hearts with fear. By now, they all knew that there was some sort of protection over their village, but they didn't know the protection was on all the villages, nor did they know what exactly the protection did or did not do, or if it would protect them from the dogs. Many villagers in the different villages had seen soldiers die when the soldiers tried to kill one of them. In Tajiia's village, Tokrel was peeking around the curtain as the last of the soldiers pulled out. She looked back at her husband, Barent, and said, "This is our best chance. No, we will know when. Besides, we don't want to leave Rodcast. He needs to go to a meeting." "There won't be any meetings for a while," stated Tokrel. Baron walked over to the window and peeked out. Then he looked out the other side of the curtain to look towards Rodcast's home. There was no movement from any of the villagers. There were only huntsmen, handlers, and dogs. He sighed and went deeper into the house. Tajiia had all kinds of questions in her mind. Some of the magic that she had wanted to try before but didn't dare to try in her village, she wanted to try now. And the people around her kept giving her ideas. So once again, she put the invisibility dome over herself. Arthur once again noticed. He sat up with his feet flat on the ground and his knees raised. He looked around the camp. Several people were stirring, and they would be up soon. After a little while, Arthur saw 2 squirrels running around their camp. He wrinkled his forehead and wondered where the other squirrel came from. At that moment, the squirrels circled around behind him, and one jumped on his shoulder, leapt onto his knee, and scampered off. Arthur was startled, but he didn't move. The second squirrel jumped on his back, and then climbed up to his shoulder. Tajiia was the second squirrel, and she hadn't ever jumped in this form before, so she didn't jump high enough to land on Arthur's shoulder. She turned her head and looked down to the ground before she climbed up. Then she tried to leap to Arthur's knees. She hit the knee with her stomach and rolled off. The jar to her stomach hurt. Arthur looked strangely at the squirrel on the ground because it lay on its back with its limbs stretched out. He saw the other squirrel circling back. Then Tajiia reversed the spell on herself. This startled Arthur, and he jumped to his feet. "Tajiia, are you okay?" He offered her a hand to sit up. Many people sat up and looked over. "I would have been a squirrel for you," stated Bollock as he walked over. Tajiia looked at him. "There are no trees here. But if you were a squirrel, could you climb a tree?" Bollock shrugged. "I don't know." He glanced around and remembered the stories that some of the others had told. "I'm sure it would be easier to climb a tree as a squirrel." "Well, I'm not a tree," stated Arthur hurriedly. "I'll be a tree," stated Mark. "Let me get my heavier cloak on." "Hey, he's my student," said Verant. "He can try to jump too," stated Tajiia. Both got their cloaks. Soon Bollock was a squirrel, and he was running in circles. Tajiia looked over to the 2 mentors. "Maybe you should sit down. That way if he falls it won't be too high." They sat down. Tajiia motioned to her squirrel friend. The real squirrel ran past Bollock and then ran up Merrick's back. The squirrel leaped from Merrick's shoulder to Verant's shoulder and then leaped to the ground. Bollock followed. Once he got on Merrick's shoulder, he turned and looked down to the ground. Then he turned to jump to Verant's shoulder, but he ended up in Verant's lap. He crawled out, and Tajiia reversed the spell. At first, Bollock felt a little dizzy, but then he looked at Tajiia and said, "It's harder than it looks. And look!" He got up and walked closer to Merrick. "His shoulder is only this tall, but as a squirrel it seemed very high up." He raised his hand above his head. "I don't think I could jump tree to tree like the real squirrels do." "Do you want the spell?" asked Tajiia. "No. Yes. No. Maybe," replied Bollock. "How long is it?" Tajiia looked at Arthur. "This one the mentees need to learn. If the soldiers come, especially with those dogs, and if we're near trees, the mentees can say this spell. The one soldier called the dogs off us when he thought we were rabbits." "Soldiers still eat squirrels," put in Shelter. Then he got looks from several other mentors. "I mean, the dogs would go after a squirrel just as they did a rabbit," stated Arthur. "But if there are trees near and the soldiers hadn't seen us, then it is a good idea." Tajiia went back to where she slept and sat down. Several walked over and sat in a circle around her. Bollock reluctantly went over too. As he did, he started reciting the fire spell in his mind. He didn't want to forget it. Then he tried to remember the word for invisible. "Do you want human first?" asked Tajiia. "Yes, please," said several. "Okay, well, you already know sands of time, a number, and grains, so I'll skip that part," started Tajiia. Arthur glanced around. Tajiia, when you say in which, don't skip that part." Several didn't remember all the words for the fire, so if you skip the words, we will be more likely to skip them. Tajiia nodded. I want my being, she said, and everyone repeated, to temporarily replicate. Wait, said Ozzy. She glanced back at Merc. Isn't sands of time with the number of grains temporary? Several passed around glances in the circle. Tajiia thought a few minutes. She glanced around to several mentors. In this spell, we are asking the universe or Mother Nature to change our being. We don't want the universe to interpret that as us not being happy with who we are. When I ask to make and keep me invisible or small, I'm still me. Oh, said Ozzy. So several others also said, oh, but they passed around confused looks. Is that a warning I need to write down? Asked Chancellor Wyckoff. Surely it is, stated Artur. Along with whatever else we discover about this activity. He had been very startled when the scroll hit his knee and then fell off. Then he was double startled when he saw Tajiia lying on the ground beside him. Moreover, Bollock looked dizzy or wobbly after he changed back to his normal form, so he was sure there were a myriad of warnings. Tajiia looked around the circle to see if they were ready, and then she started again. I want my being to temporarily replicate. She paused, and they repeated. The being of a squirrel, they again repeated. Inside and out, they repeated. Now, in which? Aryan Ab Taj Wasidit Pithan. Tajiia glanced around the circle and saw much discomfort. She looked at her mother, then Arswaya, then Artur. Dear, I think most would be more comfortable with Wadid Achasin, stated Artur. Yes, I mean, we're saying spells to change ourselves inside and out, put in Arswaya. That is probably more magic than just invisibility. Tajiia almost imperceptibly shook her head to herself. Okay. Aryan Ab Taj Wadid Achasin Pithan Yenu Iguas Shasutan Replazor Eska Zaitai? She looked up and around. Oh, sorry. Is that too fast? Yes, said several. After grains is Yenu Iguas Shasutan, they repeated. Replazor Eska Zaitai Taj? She paused, and they repeated. Lith Shasustan of what? Tajiia was having trouble keeping her place and her words. It just wasn't normal to speak like that. Fimertai rotern indins all oxdins. Okay, started Balshum. I'm a mentee of you, so I'm asking a question. Arswaya just raised her eyebrows. Then she thought that Tajiia was teaching them all, so they were all mentees in a way. So, in all of those words, started Belshum, I think Fimertai Rotern is squirrel. So my question is, if I switch that to, say, Foligir, will I change to a bird instead? You should, replied Tajiia. A nondescript bird. She looked at Bollock. Nondescript. Is that human? Yep, replied Bollock. The image in your mind will determine more without more words, replied Tajiia. She motioned to her squirrel friend. He will help us picture a squirrel. What's the word for rabbit? Asked Ozzy excitedly. Comage, replied Tajiia, slightly confused. That's a much easier word, replied Ozzy. She and several others started saying the words to themselves. Some of the rescued prisoners felt a little awkward with the lengthy spell, so some asked those around them about sands of time, because although they've heard bits and pieces of talk, they didn't grasp it. Tajiia had to retell the words in which several more times, but after 15 minutes or so, there were several squirrels and rabbits running around their camp, and one bird that was flapping its wings but not lifting off the ground. Then they returned to normal, and Artur got them walking. Tajiia slipped her hand in her mother's hand and said quietly, "I'm not a good teacher." Akel stopped and turned Tajiia towards herself. She pushed the hair out of Tajia's face. "What are you talking about? We had many people change their being. I've never seen or heard of that in all of my witching." "She's right," put in Arswaya. "There's a myth or two, but nothing real in my lifetime." "Yes, but I said to be able to climb a tree," stated Tajiia. Ozzy was near, and her eyes widened as she realized things. "A rabbit can't climb a tree," continued Tajiia. "Dear, you are worried about the wrong thing," stated Arswaya. "Where's Raisler? He will tell you that your students had success. This is practice. Let them practice whatever being they want, and as they get more proficient, then make them do different animals." "That's true," stated Raisler. "There are no trees here, but perhaps there is a rabbit hole. Your students had success. You're a great teacher." "Yes, you are," stated Belshum. "Maybe I couldn't fly, but I found and ate a worm." Tajiia raised her eyebrows. "I was hungry, but I wouldn't eat a worm as a human. Just like I'm sure Ozzy and Allah wouldn't eat grass." She motioned to the two. Tajiia looked over. She looked around. She wasn't sure they should be eating those things unless they were those beings much longer than 5 minutes. But she didn't say anything. They started walking again. Artur was glad they had Akel with them because he realized that Tajiia would go to her. He glanced around the group and he started seeing animals here and there. But the people carrying the geese didn't change unless they passed the goose to someone else. Whoever carried the rabbit would set the rabbit down before they changed, often into a rabbit, and they would hop with the real rabbit for 5 minutes before they changed back and scooped up the rabbit to carry once more. Artur shook his head to himself. How could Tajiia not see her success? He did realize that most of the rescued prisoners hadn't changed yet, so he would need to check on them. As they walked, Artur would make his way to different people and engage them in conversation to assess things. He had learned through the years how vital this was. After the soldiers finished assembling, they started marching north. For the most part, they walked in a straight line through the villages and the woods. They didn't have troops to the west of the river, only east of it. Their lines curved just like the road, and they were 8 deep. People peered out from behind their curtains as horses with soldiers rode past, and as foot soldiers followed after horses. The soldiers had to go around the houses in the villages and the trees in the woods, but their mission was clear. They were to kill all witches and warlocks. Then they would bring the king's wizards to the villages and rout anyone else out. Barrett was looking through the curtain. Now he needed to decide. Staying within the village with protection was an option, until the soldiers killed whosoever placed the protections. And then the villages would be traps. They could head east. They could head to the east, to the west, or south to another location. Or they could follow the soldiers, which seemed a death wish. He headed back into an inner room. Mr. Dwandles had spoken of a strange area before the huntsmen arrived. So that meant the meeting tree had been in their woods. The witch community must have been looking for someone in particular. His eyes opened wider as he thought of Tajiia. Was she a witch? He and Tokrel hadn't been to a meeting in a while because Mr. Bicharhit was always nosing around the village. Barrett thought back on when Tajia's father had brought her around, and he explained that Tajiia had never learned to talk. Was that a ruse? He didn't know. but he removed the rug and fake floorboard and pulled out his books. Tokrel came in and asked him what he was doing. Barrett looked up. I'm deciding on what we're going to do, and to do that I need to read. You think Tajiia is one of the prophecies? Asked Tokrel as she read some of his thoughts. I'm starting to think so, stated Barrett. A chicken said that a squirrel said that it was Tajiia's house that they tried to burn first, stated Tokrel. Barrett nodded his head. But we've watched out the window, and it doesn't seem that they have her. Have the chickens mentioned her in any other way? Tokrel shook her head. Have you heard anything from our queen, Lafsa? No, replied Tokrel. Well, go talk to the chickens and look around a little, stated Barrett. Just tell the huntsman that the birds need to eat. Tokrel nodded and headed out. A huntsman immediately stopped her, and she told him her chickens needed to eat. The huntsman agreed and followed her and stayed with her as she fed the chickens. Tokrel was able to covertly look around, and she saw Rodcast watching. She immediately knew her husband was right, and they could not leave him. Just before she put the chickens back in their pen, one thought to her, Meet us between our villages. We are directly west of you. Ask for Thressler. She wanted to motion to Rodcast, but she didn't chance it. She thought to a chicken to tell the goat the news. Hopefully, Rodcast would talk to his goat. She went inside, and after the huntsman walked some way away, she told her husband the message. They would leave once it was fully dark. Barrett started gathering a few things, and Tokrel made a sleeping potion in case they had to deal with any huntsman. It was approaching noon with the sun directly overhead. Many people were walking along in thought, and just as many were talking in small groups, when suddenly an elephant appeared in their midst. The elephant tried to raise up to its hind legs, and then its front legs came crashing to the ground. The elephant swung its head and its trunk back and forth. This jarred everyone out of their thoughts and conversations. Many stood stock still. Several backed up. No one knew where the elephant came from or what to do with the mad elephant. Tajiia just stared at it. Finally, she leaned over to her mother and said, What is that? Mikela glanced at her daughter. It's an elephant, dear. I certainly didn't teach that word, replied Tajiia. Is that elephantin? Mikela glanced back and forth between her daughter and the elephant. Yes, that is the word. Is that someone from our group? I don't remember names, but he was the only one left in his group, replied Tajiia. Wagler? Asked Arswaya. As several heard the name, they looked around for Wagler and could not see him, so they became less scared of the elephant. After 5 minutes, the elephant disappeared and Wagler stood in its place, but he didn't stand long. He half fell and half sat on the ground. Wow, he said. He put his hand in his head to wait till he was no longer dizzy. What made you try that? Asked Artur. Wagler looked up, but he swayed, put his head back in his hand. The dogs. I don't want to run from the dogs. They're too fast. He looked up. I tried to think of an animal that wouldn't run from dogs. I thought an elephant could stomp on them. He put his head back down. Tajiia raised her eyebrows. There had been so many dogs that she never thought about fighting them. But she realized what her mother was saying, to let the students become whatever animal they wanted. Wagler wasn't getting up, so everyone sat down. Several found a few nuts that they had, but their rations were really low. Shaful asked a witch with paper for some, and she started drawing animals on the page. And several looked on. She drew a horse and a mouse and a cat. At first, the animals were rough sketches, but then she started adding details. After a little while, her mentee, Carmise, asked, Why are you drawing these? I mean, your drawings are very good. I wish I could draw like that. But if I could, I wouldn't think to draw now. Remember what Allah said about the picture in your mind?" asked Shaful. "Well, it will be easier for people to see with the drawings. And I'm hoping when we stop for the night, you will get Tajiia to name them in which." "Waggler as an elephant was totally scary," stated Carmise. "Except he's not moving from his spot," stated Shaful. "I think we need to practice different ones now, and not when the dogs are chasing us. Did you see Balak miss Varant's shoulder this morning? Did you see Belshum not fly? If I said bird or Folgir, and I expected to fly away from the dogs, I would have been sorely surprised." Carmise's eyes widened as she looked at her mentor. "But what if I became a horse and you rode me to safety?" asked Shaful. One of the rescued prisoners pointed to the page and said, "I think I'd rather be a bee. Can you draw a bee? The soldiers didn't pay any mind to the bees we rode." Shaful glanced over her shoulder and then drew a bee on the page. Other people started asking for different animals, but before she drew them all, Autor got them walking again. An hour or so before dusk, Varant went out and asked a husband to let him buy goat milk. So the husband walked him over to Rodcast, and Varant said, "Milk, 2 pints, please." Then he thought with the goat to see if the goat got the message from the chicken and if she passed it to Rodcast. The goat thought, "Rodcast had been around the villagers too long and doesn't believe he heard anything." At that moment, Rodcast looked up at Varant, startled. The huntsman noticed and said, "All right, what's going on between you two?" Rodcast stuttered. The goat thought, "I don't have 12 pints of milk." Rodcast said, I don't have 12 pints of milk. I never have that much." The huntsman slapped the back of Rodcast's head. "He didn't say 12. He said 2. Now wake up and do your job." Rodcast had tried to duck away, but he couldn't. He knew, though, he had been fortunate that it wasn't worse. He quickly got the 2 pints as he thought to the goat, "Are we meeting the people?" The goat had already thought with Varant, and she thought to Rodcast, "They're leaving at dark. Get ready once Varant leaves." Rodcast handed over the pints to the huntsman, and Varant handed the coins to the huntsman in exchange. The huntsman inspected everything to make sure there was no note, and then he escorted Varant back home. When it was time for the group to stop, Tajiia put up the air wall like normal. The 5 girls were heading over to her, followed by most everyone else, when suddenly Tajiia became a tree. A very large oak tree. Balak looked at Varant and asked, "Am I supposed to climb the tree?" Varant shrugged. "I guess." Tajiia wasn't really paying anyone attention, as she had roots going deep into the ground and she had large limbs spreading up. She was thinking, if she were a tree, then the soldiers wouldn't have a clue, and they might talk about their plans. A tree might be a perfect spy. Of course, the soldiers would have to come to the tree instead of a bird flying closer to the soldiers. The next thing she knew, she felt a squirrel climbing her, and then 2. Tajiia realized right away that the nails of the squirrel were not hurting her like they normally did. Balak had followed the real squirrel up the trunk, but then he looked down and decided that he was high enough. Autor saw his hesitation. He hadn't tried to be an animal, mostly because Tajiia had said mentees, but he decided that he needed to experience this. So he said the words and became a squirrel. Autor then ran straight up the tree. When he got to the first branch, he looked down and became afraid. "Oh shoot, I need down before I change back." Everyone looked up at the talking squirrel. "Oh, right," stated Balak. "I forgot about time. I need down too." Balak turned to face down the tree, but going down was very scary. Autor didn't move from his branch. The real squirrel ran past both and back to the ground. Balak started easing down the trunk. He was near the ground when the 5 minutes was up. Thankfully, he tucked his head and rolled onto the ground. "Are you okay?" asked Ozzy. "I was going to try until I heard Autor talk about time." Balak sat up and rubbed his head. "I'm okay. I think I need 10 minutes instead of 5. Nah, replied Variant. 1 more minute and you would have been down. Bollock knew he was teasing, but he didn't feel bad as he looked up in the tree and saw Artur on the branch. Artur was laying on the branch as himself, and he wasn't moving. Say the spell again, suggested Merc. Then you can climb down. I could be an elephant and you can drop on me, suggested Waggler. Tajiia thought, or you could say the spell to become a leaf and float down to the ground. That's not funny, shouted Artur as he glanced up in the branches of the tree. Several looked around. They didn't feel like he was responding to either Merc or Waggler. Waggler, I appreciate your offer, but what if I miss? Stated Artur. Well, what about what Merc suggested? Stated Arswea. I mean, thankfully Tajiia didn't say her spell for only 5 minutes, but she needs to reverse the spell and we all need to rest. I can't climb down, stated Artur. Tajiia thinks I should be a leaf and float down. That's a great idea, said Ozzy as she clasped her hands together. Artur gave her a frown. If I float, I have no control. What if the wind lifts me up and I float away from the group? No one knew what to say. Shaful decided to sit under the tree on the other side where Artur wouldn't fall on her. She started drawing once more. The first thing she added to her drawings was the drawing of a tree and a leaf. Then suddenly Chelter said, a magical Arab. That's how we got in our tree. Shaful received, draw a lower branch on the tree. Shaful glanced around a bit. Then she added a lower branch. Artur was still trying to decide how to get down. The words for the squirrel spell were completely gone from his mind. Then suddenly, the branch he was on started to move, and this scared him. I'm working on it, Tajiia. Please hold the spell a little longer. The rest of the group started backing up from the tree as they saw the movement of the limb. Artur was ready to panic, but then he noticed the others backing up, and he saw the amusement on Arswea's face. So he just clung onto the branch and rode it down. When it stopped, he dismounted the limb like he would a horse. Then he sat down where he stood. Tajiia undid the tree and caught Shaful from falling backwards. Once the group sat, Arswea said, I like that Tajiia became a tree today. That really increases our options. Of course, soldiers and woodsmen chop trees to build homes or fires, so it would be better to be in the middle of some real trees and try not to become such a beautiful tree, as Tajiia demonstrated. So basically, started Alla, anything we think to become or know the word to become, we have to think of what could happen to that animal or object. Yes, replied Tajiia. You need to think of consequences or repercussions before you ever say the first words of a spell. Now here is an extra warning. Do you remember how you pictured the flame in Ozzy's hand before casting your own? Alla nodded her head. If you pictured the repercussions too firmly or vividly, she glanced at Bollock and he nodded to indicate her words were indeed human, so she continued, you will ensure that repercussion or consequence happens. So don't linger on it. Just move on to how you would handle it. Say a soldier catches you as a squirrel. Then maybe you run into his bag and become a button. Later be a bug and crawl out. Maybe I just want to be a rock on the ground, put in Bollock. Then the soldiers would walk right past me and never even notice me. Several thought that was a good solution. What did people do with small rocks? That's all fine and good, stated Tajiia, until the soldiers decide they want to camp in the spot where you are a rock and your spell is only set for an hour. Bollock opened his eyes wide. Oh, I thought I had the perfect solution. Several in the circle nodded their heads or agreed with Bollock, and the sudden realization of being in the middle of the soldiers and coming out of whatever form shocked them. Artur glanced around and noticed the nervousness and wariness of the group. You won't always be able to predict everything because you can't always predict others' actions. But just stay calm and think of a solution as you come upon the trouble. When we were with Tajiia, in the woods, the soldiers came upon us, but we were near a hollow log, and Tajiia made us small to enter the log. He motioned to Ozzy. I believe she said that we wouldn't always find a log, and I knew that to be a viable truth. I had no solution. But the next time we were near a rabbit's home, he motioned to the rabbit in the group, and the rabbits let us in. What I'm trying to say is sometimes the solution is just there for you. If you're Tajiia, stated Bollock, I never would have thought to visit rabbits in their home as an option, even now that we did it. Half the time I don't believe we did it. I have to look around for the rabbit to convince myself. A few in the circle chuckled at that, and many realized not only did they need an idea, but they also needed to know the words for those ideas. Well, started Ozzy, I think we need the words to say before we go to bed, and in the morning. We need those words too. That way I can at least say my fire spell and not burn myself. So Tajiia once again told him the words to say at night. Oma trutal almis trostil gratles onwa pat alwans wulstutan. And then she told him the human translation was, Mother Nature, Universe Divine, thank you for your protection. Before we continue talking about what we can turn into, started Artur, what answers are you looking for, Tajiia? I told you before that I didn't think when I protected the one village. She glanced around to several in the group. I also added a curse. The protection wasn't enough. I even went back to Thressler's village to add the curse. Now the soldiers and handlers and dogs cannot harm anyone in the villages without harm coming right back to them. So the king wants to kill whosoever casts the spell, so that he can go back and harm the villagers. Tajiia paused again and looked around. There are a lot of soldiers, she motioned to the group. More than double or triple our numbers. We cannot fight them. The air walls I've left need to do something. And I know they will kill their own if it bears our faces, but then they know what we look like. Raglar raised his hand. Pick me! They know my face already. And I'm not just talking about the ones that saw me in the woods. They have signs in the various villages with my picture. So several of the prisoners raised their hands, and one said, We were in prison. They know what we look like. You can use our face. Arshwaya leaned forward and briefly touched Tahia's knee. We are your people, and we know there are risks. Several of us have read the prophecies and know the hard times ahead. So for now, use the faces suggested. Well, I for one wouldn't mind, started Merc. I wouldn't mind them walking through the wall and spraying out without their armor. They don't have to be naked or inside wood, but armorless would make them easier to fight. Some soldiers are through the first air walls. She nodded her head towards Bollock. If he hadn't walked into the first wall I did for the group, I wouldn't have thought to stay connected to it. Now I have a question. How did the trees know to light up? If there are witches out there, I don't necessarily want them to... Ah, yes, stated Merkel. We understand, and it is possible. Yes, with the villages under martial law, many witches, warlocks, and wizards will want to make it to the safety of the mountains, stated Tharkek. And the soldiers know that, stated Tajiia suddenly. The mountains are a trap for us. Many had their heart jump as they thought of the legitimacy of Tahia's statement, and they knew the current king would love to have them all in one location to wipe them out. We will be trapped in the mountains for months, stated Karmaz. How will we eat? I will be a really small bug and go out and eat and then go back, stated Bollock. A few laughed, and there was silence for a few minutes. Then Visor asked, Why would you go back if you had escaped? Well, started Bollock. Well, we would want to stick together, put in Arshwaya. I suddenly don't feel scared of the soldiers trapping us in the mountain. We can go out and get food and help other witches get past the soldiers. Several indeed felt better with those thoughts and the thoughts of turning into something else while the soldiers were nearby. Autor thought they could get groups on both sides of the soldiers and have advantages in fighting them because he knew they didn't always want to have to sneak out to eat. Then Arswaya got several to explain to Tajiia how to have the air walls checked for a magic user or non-magic user. And they happened to have 2 wizards in the group, so Tajiia could feel the difference between wizard and warlock. Afterwards, Tajiia had one more question. What if a soldier walks through the wall and takes his face? She motioned to Waggler. And then a witch or a warlock on our side walks through the wall and sees him. Just when you think you have everything figured out, said Tilka as she slung her arm across her body and snapped her fingers. A twist gets thrown in. Autor thought a minute and then spoke slowly. I think we can't worry about everything. This is the best plan so far. I don't know if you can change armor to regular clothes or not. But if Waggler's face is on the same size or shaped body that walked through, and he wore clothes from a village, then witches and warlocks and wizards on our side would already question things. Everyone glanced at Waggler and realized Waggler was very tall and stocky, which was something many knew. Also, his hair puffed out and made his head seem round, big and round. So people knew Waggler. He was very distinctive looking. Bollock jumped up and said, You're always testing things on me. Make my head look like Waggler's. Without saying anything audibly, Tajiia cast the spell for 1 minute in time. Once Bollock's head looked like Waggler's, many started laughing and laughing. Many agreed that if they ran into this version of Waggler, they would automatically know that it was not him. Waggler actually smiled with pride. Tajiia wasn't sure she could keep the soldier's body without looking at it, so she instead used the bodies of all the prisoners with Waggler's head on each. She had the wall spread out behind them, so she just used 1 person per wall. The soldiers would have to walk through 3 or 4 more walls before they got to the line of walls with the effect. And the effect would last 100,000 grains, or a little over 4.5 hours. She wasn't sure how to change armor to clothes, if she left the clothes on, she left the armor on, so the soldiers would shoot through in their undergarments and the armor would fly off and become clothes as it went through the wall. No one knew the decisions Tajiia made or that she already cast the spell, and they didn't know how far back the wall was that hid the spells. Ozzy led everyone in the evening thanks before they laid down to sleep. Okay, writers, that is the end of chapter 11. We peeked in on the enemy and what he is doing, but I didn't have anything about the soldiers already following Tajiia's group, and I didn't have anything from Mr. Dwandles. Surely he is shouting something, or he is too scared to prophesize right now. Still, I need to mention something about him. As I read the story for the channel, I'm seeing these holes. I saw a couple errors while I was reading to you today. I had to go back and fix them. I'm sure I can fix them. I also saw, in reading today, I also saw at least 2 incidents of foreshadowing today. But I won't give them away. So you will have to think about what I said and that's predicting. When you write your stories, it most likely will be the same for you. You focus on one part, write down everything, and then you read and edit and find how you need to fill things out or fill holes in. It's all fun stuff. When you write for NaNoWriMo Challenge, you may just write straight for a month. Then at the beginning of December, you can go back and read and edit what you wrote. Or you could write in the morning before you go to work, and in the evening when you get home, you can read your work. It's up to you what you do there. Leave a comment below on what animal or object you would try if you could say the spell to change your being inside and out. If you're ambitious, you could also comment on any problems you foresee with whichever animal or object. Join me Tuesday for a writing prompt. We will be adding to your cave, so you may want to find it and have it ready to go. And join me Friday for Tajiia Chapter 12. Visit my website and read some character bios. Leave a comment on which characters are your favorites so far. I think my youngest daughter she calls it number 2. So she likes Aaliyah in Mykela, and she likes Laura in Operatives. So the number 2 person, the person that's the friendliest or the most helpful to the protagonist. So she calls it number 2. I don't necessarily think of it number 2, but she likes those characters. So let me know which characters you like. I hope you are enjoying writing your stories as much as I am. Don't forget to share your stories by sending them to WritewithMykela@gmail.com. That's the chapter exchange part, when you share your chapters with me. No polishing required, but you need to get your work out there. Come on, send it in. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and the bell so we can continue to write together. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, then please share with them. This is Mykela with Write with Mykela. Bye for now.